Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Your support helps keep these forgotten Hollywood stories alive, stories that deserve to be remembered long after the applause has faded. Now, let's step back into a moment in film history that still raises questions, still stirs emotions, and still feels painfully human. There are moments in Hollywood that seem untouchable, moments wrapped in nostalgia and laughter. But sometimes, behind the smiles that entertained millions, there are silences so deep they echo for generations. One such silence followed the death of Oliver Hardy in 1957. When the world gathered to say goodbye to one half of the most beloved comedy duo in cinema history, something felt wrong. Stan Laurel was not there. No familiar thin figure. No tearful farewell beside the coffin, just absence. Fans were stunned. Journalists were confused. Rumors spread like wildfire. How could a bond that survived decades of fame, failure, illness, and endless tour end in such distance? Was it betrayal? Was it regret? Or was the truth something far more painful than anyone imagined? To understand that silence, we must first understand the lives that led to it. Stan Laurel's early life. Stan Laurel was born Arthur Stanley Jefferson on June 16, 1890, in Ulverston, England, into a world where performance was not a dream but daily life. His father managed theaters, and from an early age, Stan absorbed the magic happening behind the curtain. While other boys chased sports or trades, Stan watched rehearsals, studied timing, and learned how laughter was built, not forced but earned. He understood that comedy wasn't about noise. It was about rhythm, patience, and vulnerability. As a teenager, he joined Fred Karno's touring troupe, a prestigious comedy training ground that also shaped Charlie Chaplin. Touring Britain and America, Stan refined his craft night after night, learning how silence could speak louder than words. He mastered pratfalls, pantomime, and the fragile balance between innocence and absurdity. These years shaped him into a thoughtful, meticulous performer who believed comedy was a shared experience, not a solo act. Long before Hollywood recognized him, Stan Laurel had already learned the most important lesson of his life. Great comedy is built on trust. That belief would later define not just his career, but his heartbreak. Oliver Hardy's early life. Oliver Hardy's childhood unfolded in a world far removed from English theater halls. Born Norvell Hardy on January 18, 1892 in Harlem, Georgia, his life began with loss. His father, a Civil War veteran, died when Oliver was still a toddler, leaving his mother to raise the family alone. School was difficult for him, and academics never held his interest. But performance did. Singing, entertaining, and drawing smiles came naturally. His large frame and gentle temperament made him both imposing and warm, a combination that would later define his screen persona. Hardy's journey into film wasn't planned. He worked as a theater projectionist and manager, observing movies before he ever appeared in one. Slowly, almost accidentally, he began acting in silent films. Unlike Stan's calculated devotion to comedy, Hardy drifted into it, guided by instinct and charm. Where Stan analyzed, Hardy felt. Where Stan planned, Hardy reacted. These differences shaped him into a performer who didn't chase perfection but radiated humanity. Neither man knew it then, but their contrasting paths were quietly steering them toward each other, preparing them for a partnership that would change cinema forever. Two paths moving toward destiny. At first glance, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy had nothing in common. One was a thin, introverted Englishman shaped by theater discipline. The other was a large, warm Southern American whose talent bloomed almost by accident. They worked in the same industry, yet lived in separate worlds. But Hollywood in the early 20th century was chaotic, experimental, and unpredictable. Actors drifted between studios, roles appeared and vanished overnight, and careers were fragile. Both Stan and Oliver were searching for stability, for purpose, for a voice that felt authentic. Neither had yet found it alone. They appeared briefly together in the 1921 short The Lucky Dog, a moment that passed without recognition. At the time, it meant nothing. They were just two working actors in a crowded silent film industry. Yet fate has a strange way of planting seeds quietly. Their real connection wouldn't form until years later at Hal Roach Studios, where creativity thrived and unlikely combinations were encouraged. It was there, among trial and error, that their destinies finally aligned. The birth of Laurel and Hardy. At Hal Roach Studios in the mid-1920s, Stan Laurel found himself working not just as an actor, but as a writer and director. Oliver Hardy, already established in supporting roles, was cast frequently opposite him. It was director Leo McCarey who noticed something special. Not just contrast, but rhythm. The confused dreamer and the self-important authority figure created a balance that felt effortless. Their comedy wasn't built on jokes alone. It was built on reaction. Stan's innocent bewilderment made Hardy's arrogance funnier. Hardy's frustration made Stan's confusion deeper. They didn't perform gags, they lived them. Their official emergence as a duo happened quietly, but audiences felt it instantly. Small gestures became legendary: a slow stare, a sigh, a delayed reaction. They trusted each other completely, and that trust translated into laughter. What made them extraordinary wasn't perfection, but connection. They understood each other's timing in ways scripts never could. In that understanding, one of cinema's greatest partnerships was born. Surviving the sound era. When sound arrived, many silent film comedians vanished. Their physical language didn't translate, and audiences moved on. Laurel and Hardy didn't. Their voices became tools, not obstacles. Hardy's polite southern drawl, Stan's high-pitched confusion, and the pauses between them added layers to their comedy. Films like Sons of the Desert and Way Out West cemented their global fame. They weren't just funny, they were relatable. Their failures felt human. Their frustrations felt familiar. You didn't laugh at them, you laughed with them. Behind the scenes, their friendship deepened. Stan adjusted his writing to highlight Hardy's strengths. Hardy trusted Stan completely. Fame came and went, but their bond stayed constant. They understood that together they were more than performers. They were a shared language. Fame, decline, and loyalty. By the 1930s, Laurel and Hardy were international stars, but Hollywood changed quickly. Their contract with Hal Roach ended, and larger studios failed to capture the same magic. Their later films lacked creative freedom, and audiences shifted toward new styles. Still, they remained loyal to each other. Through the 1940s, they continued working, even touring Europe. By the early 1950s, their popularity had faded, but affection remained. Determined to reconnect, they launched the Birds of a Feather tour across Britain. Financial pressure was heavy. Theaters were sometimes half empty, yet children still laughed, older fans still applauded, and Laurel and Hardy still delivered everything they had: the tour that changed everything. On May 17, 1954, after a performance in Plymouth that left audiences in tears of laughter, Oliver Hardy suffered a mild heart attack. The tour ended immediately. That night marked the last time they would ever perform together on stage. Hardy's health declined rapidly. Laurel stood by him, quietly, faithfully. Their final public appearance came later that year on This Is Your Life, a reunion filled with unspoken fear. What followed was not a dramatic goodbye, but a slow, devastating silence. Hardy's condition worsened. By 1956, a major stroke left him bedridden and unable to speak. For a man whose career relied on expression, the silence was cruel. Stan Laurel adapted without hesitation. When he visited, he refused to speak, so Hardy wouldn't feel ashamed. They communicated the way they always had, through looks, pauses, and presence. It was love without words. Paragraph 10. Oliver Hardy's death. On August 7, 1957, Oliver Hardy died at 65. The world mourned. Stan Laurel collapsed emotionally and physically. When the funeral came, he stayed away. Not out of anger, not out of distance, but because his grief was unbearable. When the day of Oliver Hardy's funeral arrived, the absence of Stan Laurel became impossible to ignore. Fans gathered, reporters waited, and cameras searched for the familiar thin figure who had stood beside Hardy for more than 3 decades. But Stan never appeared. That empty space spoke louder than any headline. Almost instantly, confusion turned into speculation. Some fans felt hurt, even betrayed. How could the man who shared every success, every failure, every laugh, not stand beside his partner one final time? Newspapers began crafting their own explanations. Old rumors were revived. Whispers of resentment, professional jealousy, or a secret falling out resurfaced without evidence. In Hollywood, silence is often mistaken for guilt, and Laurel's silence only fueled the fire. Few stopped to consider the emotional cost of such a loss. For over 30 years, Stan Laurel had not just worked with Oliver Hardy, he had lived with him creatively, emotionally, and spiritually. Their partnership wasn't a job that ended when the cameras stopped rolling. It was a daily rhythm, a shared existence. To the public, the funeral was a moment of closure. To Stan, it was the unbearable confirmation that half of his life was truly gone. And that difference in perspective would soon reveal the painful truth behind his decision. In the days following Oliver Hardy's death, Stan Laurel was not simply grieving, he was breaking down. Friends who visited him described a man who looked physically unwell, pale, trembling, and exhausted by sorrow. He struggled to eat, struggled to sleep, and at times struggled to speak. The loss struck him with a force that his aging body could barely endure. This was not the reaction of a colleague losing a co-star. It was the reaction of a man losing the one constant presence of his adult life. For decades, Laurel's identity had been inseparable from Hardy's. Every routine, every scene, every success was built together. Now, that structure had collapsed overnight. Doctors warned that intense emotional stress could worsen Laurel's own fragile health. The idea of attending a public funeral, surrounded by crowds, cameras, and expectations, felt overwhelming. Laurel knew himself well enough to understand that he might not survive the emotional impact of seeing Hardy laid to rest. His grief was not quiet sadness, it was consuming, disorienting, and physically dangerous. Staying away was not an act of avoidance, it was an act of survival, a choice made not from distance, but from devastating closeness. Beyond his personal grief, Stan Laurel carried another heavy concern, one shaped by decades in Hollywood's unforgiving spotlight. He understood the press better than most. He knew that if he appeared at Oliver Hardy's funeral, the focus would inevitably shift. Cameras would follow him. Reporters would analyze his expressions, his tears, his posture. Headlines would no longer be about Hardy's life and legacy, but about Laurel's pain. Stan feared that the funeral would stop being a farewell to Oliver Hardy and instead become a public examination of Stan Laurel's grief. He could not allow that to happen. To him, Hardy deserved dignity, not distraction. He believed that Babe's final goodbye should belong to Babe alone. This belief was deeply rooted in the way Stan had always worked. Even at the height of their fame, Laurel consistently pushed attention toward the partnership rather than himself. He adjusted scripts, altered jokes, and softened his own presence to protect the balance between them. In death, that instinct did not disappear. Staying away was, in his mind, the only way to ensure that Hardy's farewell remained sacred. It was not cowardice. It was respect, expressed through painful restraint. When people eventually questioned Stan Laurel about his absence, he did not offer long explanations or dramatic defenses. He simply said, "Babe would understand." Those 3 words carried the weight of a lifetime. Laurel believed with complete certainty that Oliver Hardy knew him better than anyone else ever could. He knew Hardy understood his sensitivity, his anxiety, and the depth of his emotional attachment. Throughout their careers, Hardy had protected Laurel just as Laurel had protected Hardy. They shielded each other from embarrassment, from criticism, and from emotional harm. In that context, Laurel felt no need to justify his choice. He was not answering to the public. He was answering to his partner. In his heart, Laurel believed that Hardy would never want him to suffer publicly for the sake of appearances. Their friendship had always existed beyond the expectations of fans or studios. It was private, trusting, and deeply personal. Laurel's decision was not about what looked right. It was about what felt right to the bond they shared. In those quiet words, "Babe would understand," Laurel expressed absolute faith in a friendship that death could not weaken. Weeks after Oliver Hardy's passing, Stan Laurel wrote a letter that finally revealed the true depth of his sorrow. In it, he confessed, "I feel lost without him after 30-odd years of close friendship and happy association." This was not the language of professional loss. It was the language of someone whose world had collapsed. Laurel admitted that everyday life felt unfamiliar and empty. The routines that once gave him comfort now reminded him of what was gone. For over 3 decades, Hardy had been the person Laurel thought about when creating comedy, when traveling, when planning the future. Without him, those thoughts had nowhere to go. The letter showed no anger, no bitterness, no unresolved conflict. It revealed only longing and disorientation. Laurel wasn't avoiding goodbye. He was trapped in it. Writing became his only way to process the loss. Each word reflected the pain of a man who had lost not just a friend, but a shared identity. The letter silenced many rumors, but by then, the damage had already been done. Still, for those who truly understood, it confirmed one thing clearly. Stan Laurel's absence was an act of love, not abandonment. After Oliver Hardy's death, the entertainment world expected Stan Laurel to continue in some form. Offers arrived steadily. Film cameos, writing jobs, television appearances. Financially, Laurel needed the work. Emotionally, he could not accept it. Performing without Hardy felt wrong, almost disrespectful. For Laurel, comedy was not something he did alone, it was something they did together. He believed that stepping back into the spotlight without Babe would feel like pretending the partnership had never mattered. So he refused everything. This decision surprised many, but it was consistent with who Laurel had always been. He had never chased fame for its own sake. What he cherished was collaboration, rhythm, and shared creation. Without Hardy, the rhythm was gone. Laurel chose quiet over recognition, memory over money. He lived modestly, carefully managing what little he had. To the public, it looked like withdrawal. To Laurel, it was loyalty. He was not retiring from comedy. He was remaining faithful to the only version of it that had ever mattered to him. Though he refused to perform, Stan Laurel never stopped creating. In his small Santa Monica apartment, he continued writing comedy routines almost every day. Not for studios, not for audiences, for Oliver Hardy. Pages filled with dialogue, timing notes, and visual gags that only Hardy could deliver. Laurel imagined Hardy's expressions, his pauses, his gentle frustration. Writing became a private ritual, a way to keep their partnership alive. Friends who visited were often surprised to see stacks of unused material. Laurel wasn't bitter about it. He simply accepted that the jokes had no place without Babe. In these quiet moments, Laurel returned to the silent language they once shared, timing, movement, and unspoken understanding. It was grief transformed into habit, creation without expectation, love without response. Through writing, Laurel preserved what death could not erase. Their partnership continued, not on screen, but in memory and imagination. The final 8 years of Stan Laurel's life passed quietly. He lived near the ocean, rarely traveling far. He answered letters from fans with warmth and humility, grateful that people still remembered the laughter. But he avoided public appearances and interviews. Grief had settled into him, not as constant pain, but as permanent absence. Those close to him described a gentle man who carried sadness without bitterness. He spoke fondly of Hardy, never in the past tense emotionally. Laurel often said that half of him had died with Babe. It wasn't exaggeration. His sense of purpose, direction, and identity had been built on partnership. Without it, life continued, but it felt incomplete. Still, he never complained. He accepted the silence the way he once accepted applause, with quiet dignity. His grief was not loud, but it was deep, steady, and enduring. On February 23, 1965, Stan Laurel died of a heart attack at the age of 74. There was no dramatic farewell, no return to the stage, no final bow. His life ended the way he had chosen to live after Hardy's death, quietly. Yet his legacy was immense. Laurel left behind not just films, but an example of loyalty rarely seen in Hollywood. He showed that partnership could be deeper than ambition, and friendship stronger than fame. In refusing to move on publicly, Laurel honored what they had shared privately. His death reunited them only in memory, but for fans, the image of Laurel and Hardy remains eternal. Two men, frozen in time, turning frustration into laughter and mistakes into joy. So did Stan Laurel make the right decision by staying away from Oliver Hardy's funeral? The answer depends on how we define love. For some, love demands presence. For others, it demands protection. Laurel chose the kind of love that shields, that steps back so another can be honored fully. His absence was not empty, it was full of meaning. It was grief too deep for public display, friendship too sacred for spectacle. Their story reminds us that behind great comedy often lies great devotion, and behind laughter, profound heartbreak. Some bonds cannot be explained, only felt, and some goodbyes are too painful to witness in public. If you found this story meaningful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. Your support helps keep these timeless stories alive.